Go ahead. So welcome back. I'd like to welcome Senator Jeff Golden. I'm so sorry. I was doing that earlier. Senator Jeff Golden, his district is in Southern Oregon and includes Medford, Ashland, Phoenix, Talent, and Jacksonville. He was among 3 state senators who offered a number of potential questions to the Assembly. A question that he wrote received the most support from the Assembly last week and will help guide the next few sessions. Last session, the Assembly also chose 2 focus areas, things to focus on within that question. So we've asked Senator Golden to offer a few more of his thoughts about what he meant by the question, how it might relate to those focus areas. And he was asked if there are policy questions coming before the legislature that might relate to those questions already. So that's what he's going to talk about for just a few minutes. And then you'll have the chance to ask him whatever questions you'd like. Again, they can be in response to what he said, or they can be questions that you've just brainstormed in small groups. Remember, you're free as an assembly to ask whatever you'd like. The senator is free to do whatever you'd like with his question. It should also be said, the senator is only here to offer a little bit more about what he was thinking or what might be coming up in the future. So remember, when he's speaking, remember to raise your hand using the raise hand feature, not like I'm doing. So use the raise hand feature in Zoom so that it shows up for me. And then when he's done speaking, I'll select randomly for who's gonna go in terms of asking questions. Senator Golden, floor is all yours.
Well, thank you. I just want to say briefly how happy I am to be here, and how much I admire and how much hope I have for the potential of the what's broadly thought of as the citizen wisdom process and citizen assemblies. We need more, and thank you for participating. So the question that I asked, kind of came from my rumination over, what is this time about really? What difference does this time make? What will it change going forward? I think everybody agrees we're not going to be the same afterwards as we were before, but how profound can the changes be? And because the pandemic kind of converged with this explosion of energy and pent-up feeling around social and racial justice, that it becomes a much more challenging conversation. And I have some concern that people may not feel fully free to talk about their genuine feelings about this, especially about social and racial justice. We are told in the legislature in these last few months, and we're going to be going back to Salem soon and have some responsibilities, that we have to bring a racial, social, but especially racial equity lens to everything we do. That should be the filter for everything we do. And people feel very strongly about that. And I have some concern that it might be very difficult for anybody to challenge that. I mean, because when you do bring a racial justice filter, there are some other things you're not doing. We're going into a big discussion about climate policy. And if you're seriously going to make sure you prioritize racial justice, it might mean it takes resources from other things you might want to do. So it's a real issue. And yet we don't really have an environment, I don't think, where people are encouraged to say what that means and what they think about that and their deepest questions about that. So one of my questions is how important is that really in the scheme of things? Is it the first and primary thing we should look at right now? And how do you have an open conversation about that? And Robin suggested to me that there are 2 specific policy areas you're interested in grounding that question with, housing and public education, K through 12 education. And those are very important with regard to those, the social racial equity issue. When it comes to housing, we are really putting a lot of resources, or we were before COVID, into our homelessness problem and our home ownership problem. And there are a lot of different programs ranging from emergency shelters for the homeless to helping people become homeowners. And those deal with people at different social and economic, and because of that, different racial groups. So which of those are you going to emphasize? There has been a push, it's a whole long story about that, to change and reduce the mortgage interest deduction that homeowners get, and take some of that money, collect some of that money instead of give it back as deductions, and use it for homelessness and housing, because some people feel it's not equitable to be using our tax dollars to support fairly comfortable homeowners, when it could be used to get people off the streets and under shelter. So there's an array of questions there. And in education, I would just mention something we passed in 2019 called the Student Success Act. It was a big deal, and it added $1 billion worth of new programs to the K through 12 system. And they were mostly targeted at kids who have not been succeeding. And a lot of dollars for preschool, making sure preschool is available to everybody, a lot for mental health and other kinds of really basic support services that schools have been able to provide to make sure that the kids who've been left behind have a better shot. Now we're facing with the cutbacks with COVID, we're saying, well, instead of doing those new add-ons that are aimed at better equity, maybe we should just let schools spend it on whatever, their general kinds of programs, because otherwise they're going to be short. So that's another racial and social equity issue. There's a lot more to say, but why don't I leave it there and see what questions you might have.
All right. Thanks for that. I see one hand up. Oh, am I seeing more? Oh, there's a bunch more now. Yes, fantastic. This is great. All right. Everybody sort of come in.
And I just wanted to share a quick note, just as a heads up, the folks, as they raise their hand in the order that they raise them, they will show up at the top of that list. So you can go down the list.
Okay, right, awesome. Well, maybe we'll just go down that list. Actually, I said I would randomize them, but you've all come in right at the last minute, so I can't do that very easily. So I'm gonna head down the list. Glenn, you have your hand up in during the presentation there. Go ahead.
Senator, how can we capitalize on this upset in our social and economic system to make progress in removing these inequalities?
I think you asked the most important question there is. We've put a pause button on the way we've been doing things, and the question is, can we turn that into a reset button? I think the simplest, shortest answer I can offer is that I hope it causes people to get more engaged with the groups that are promoting and advocating for the changes they want. And I can't think of an opinion you might have about Oregon where there isn't a group who agrees with you, who wants to advocate for that kind of thing. So I think some people say, so what do I do personally to, deal with racism or deal with homelessness? And I think the answer to that is to check out and put energy into the groups who've been doing some pretty great work on all of those things. So it's going to rely on personal decisions to find time and energy to join up with those who've taken the lead on these issues, and get to Salem and get to your congressional town halls and get to your city halls and be heard in numbers intelligently and respectfully by your elected officials.
All right, I see Lori.
Yes, Senator, you had mentioned about the children that were being left behind. And my question is, how do we know, because we're now out of the classroom, how do we know that those children are hitting benchmarks? What type of testing is going to be required to make sure that those children that are not hitting benchmarks are not going to be left behind because there's no teacher in front of them to assist them in their learning?
Boy, that is a really, really important question you're asking. And one of the things that has people the most nervous about all this remote learning, there are plenty of families and parents who are doing a great job right now with their kids, and there's some not so much, and those kids will get lost and left behind. That's one of answering that question is going to be one of the tasks of our education committee coming up in the next session. And we've been slow to answer it because we've been hoping and hoping and hoping we can open the classrooms in the fall and we don't have to keep doing this. And I'm really sad to say that that's looking really unlikely. So Lori, I don't have a good answer for you how we do that. And that is going to be one of the first answers that well, there's a governor's task force and legislators take up. It's an urgent question and really needs attention.
All right.
That's a long way of saying I don't know.
Let's go to Ken next. I think you're muted, Ken.
That's embarrassing. Okay.
No sweat.
On the question of education, when I hear it discussed, it's always a question about the students, which I absolutely agree is vitally important. But no one ever mentions the teachers who across the US, and particularly here in Oregon, tend to be underappreciated and underpaid for their level of education and expertise required. And yet people say, oh, students don't get all that sick. 20% of Portland teachers over 55, more than a third, have some pre-existing condition that makes them very susceptible. But I'd never hear a word about any concern about them when they talk about reopening schools quickly. How do we balance this students versus teachers in order to treat everybody equitably?
Well, I think regardless of what people are saying, I think concern for teachers and staff and older people is getting a lot of weight. Because what you're hearing now, you heard it from the governor this week and others, is we aren't going to be opening in the fall. There might be the hybrid models, but we're certainly not going to be fully opening because the numbers are too bad. And if you were just looking at students, we might not be saying that because, you know, I don't want to get into complex science because it's not even well understood, but it does appear that children don't have as severe consequences, at least I'll put an asterisk there, but that's the belief right now. And if we were just saying we're just concerned about students, we might be opening some public schools. We're not going to be, at least not fully. And that is because of the exact reason you say. So to my mind, you're right. You don't hear it a lot in conversation, but in terms of what's driving policy, I think concern for older people who work in schools and are around schools does have quite a bit of weight.
Thank you.
All right, Madison.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for your time. So
Sure.
I think I have a question that's more directly related to the phrasing of your question and the questions therein, less about maybe what the answer is, but a lot of your questions have a beginning that start with how much should we do about this or care about this or how important is this from the perspective of a legislator. What's a meaningful way that a recommendation could be presented to put some sort of number on that or some sort of measurable? What kind of metric should be used in a recommendation to convey the importance of something from a citizen's perspective?
I guess it would depend on what the subject is, what we're talking about. Some things have pretty easy metrics. Climate, I mentioned before, percentage of homeless, whatever. But I don't know if you want to say a little bit more when you ask metrics. Are you thinking about a particular issue?
Well, I'm just thinking it would be easy for us to come together and say this is important or is not important to us, but how to make that a little bit more meaningful, I think.
Yeah, I think I would go back to what I said about priorities. You know, we're told that the prevailing thought is whatever the policy issue is right now, the very first top consideration is racial and social equity. And in a perfect world with plenty of resources, that would be fantastic. But in fact, you make choices about resources. So if you do that, what are the consequences that? What are you not doing if you make sure that the racial and the racial equity piece is completely addressed? And is that still the priority you want? I hope that gets to some of it. You have to ground it, it seems to me, in what does it mean in terms of how we spend our resources to make sure that racial and social equity is completely addressed. And then compare it to other ways you could do it and say which is the best of these. And your question deserves a little more time and thought.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. We're a bit over time here, but I just want to slip in, if I can, one more question, because I think I can make up a little bit of time later. So one more, Jeff. Jeff.
Hello, Senator.
Hey.
My question is, I'm going to flip up since the eviction moratorium is ending here soon. Have you guys talked about what our next step is so these individuals do not lose their housing?
We, 2 weeks ago in Salem, we extended the moratorium 90 days. The deadline goes from June 30th to September 30th. And I think the thought is we're going to see what the pandemic and what economic conditions are in August and September. We're probably going to be in for 2 or 3 more special sessions. But we just bought 90 days, which of course has some landlords less than thrilled. But in Oregon, in a lot of the country, it's ending this moratorium in what, 3 or 4 or 5 days. In Oregon, and we've got another 90 days.
Thank you.
All right. That's all we have time for. Tyler, Adair, Annette, and Alan, I see you with your hands up. Unfortunately, we didn't have time in this session. Come back, ask a question of the experts later on today. And if you'd like to ask a question of the senator offline, I imagine that he would be willing to hear from you. I don't want to speak for you, but we're happy to pass along any of those outside of this, so send them to us.
Good. Yeah, absolutely.
Senator Golden, thanks so much for your time.
It was a pleasure. You guys are doing really important work. I hope it's enjoyable and educational, and maybe you can give us some clues in Salem about how to solve these problems. Sure hope so. Talk to you again,
Thank
I
you.
hope.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care. So we're going to move straight into our next section here, which involves me sharing my screen. If everyone can mute their audio again, just for this next little session, we'll be going into small groups here really soon. Oh, let me remind myself how I do that. Yes. Okay. So just to explain what's coming up really fast. So this will be a very similar kind of thing. Have about 10 minutes in small groups to this time brainstorm questions for the next witness. You can see I forgot something, just to put the witnesses' bios in there. I put it in the presentation, but not in here. Sorry about that. So let me pull up the presentation again and remind you who these witnesses are. I'll paste them in there as well so that they're on your screen when you're doing the small group chat. There we go. Let's see my whole screen here now. So just as a reminder, somebody from the state economist office and somebody from PSU. So the state economist office, that person will just be a video recording, and this researcher from PSU will be here as sort of a supplement to say a few extra things and then answer your questions. So these are folks that have a fairly general state economic knowledge, which seemed to be what you were going for in selecting that expert. So that's what we've tried to get for you. Now, just a second here, get back to the proper screen. All right. But the first thing I wanted to say before we do that is to introduce you to something that we have used in citizens initiative reviews going back a really long time, which is in fact where this little list comes from. This is a list of themes from the past panels have come up with when evaluating, in this case, they were evaluating ballot measures, but evaluating any kind of information that may be applicable. This is sort of a strong and reliable checklist. what kind of information might be more or less strong and reliable than other things. Now, in a longer process and in the future, we might come back and add things together as a group to this list. But for this, we're going to mail you in the next week this page, which has these checklist items that previous citizen panels have come up with, and then a space for you to write additional ones for yourself as you're evaluating the information that comes in from these various witnesses that are coming up in the sessions. So just to go through the ones that folks have suggested previously, that information is specific, not vague, that information is current, not outdated, that it's relevant to the topic at hand, that it's able to be verified. That is, it's not just an opinion, it could actually be proven right or wrong, theoretically, that it's placed in context, that is like compared to what? Is it a big number? That it's from an established expert, it's from a neutral source, maybe somebody without a personal financial interest in the outcome, as far as you can tell. So these are all kind of things, but there are many more potentially that you might identify as ways to sort of identify the strongest information. So I wanted to introduce you to that, and then remind you the next thing we're doing is to go into small groups. I'll stop sharing my screen here. And and yes, just another reminder that the person you requested from the education category, that is somebody from the Department of Education, there is somebody lined up and they'll be here next week. All right. I think that's all I need to say. Let's head into small groups. Same small groups as before.